Good afternoon, colleagues. Once again, I'm Franz Gertze, the CEO of the Namibia Qualifications Authority. Africans who are set to make a difference in the qualifications landscape for our beloved continent. Now, before we go on and talk about what qualifications frameworks, how they look like, what the architecture is, the levels, descriptors, and all these type of things, I think there is a cardinally important point, and that is for us all to agree on what is the purpose of education. Why are we involved in education and training? And if we all agree or have some consensus, then we can say, based on that fundamentals, we can move forward and develop design tools such as the qualifications frameworks. Now, I'm showing you an image here. The whole purpose of education is to turn mirrors into windows. Chris, or Sidney Harris in this instance, meant we must look beyond ourselves. We must look beyond ourselves as individuals, as nationals, through to becoming continental players and inhabitants of our beloved planet. So that's the purpose of education. Education and training is about people, planet, and prosperity. We'll also read that purpose of education is to prepare the individual's mind and the national, who is the citizen. So if we agree on this in theory with these definitions of what the purpose of education is to be, then we can go on and talk about the qualifications frameworks. Next slide, please. Right, now if we talk about people, planet, and prosperity, and we look at the World Gapminder for this one, unfortunately for 2025, and we talk about the national, a continental framework, a framework which must enhance prosperity, which must make for better living conditions of people through quality education and training. We all try to be having a healthy nation with a higher level of income, continuously improving. And you would see all the countries in the right top corner, like Qatar, Singapore, Luxembourg, Kuwait, Norway, Switzerland. Those are the countries with high levels of life expectancies and higher levels of income. Where is Africa? Next slide. No, that slide is not there. Okay, but can we go back, please? If you look at all the blue dots there in your left-hand corner, that's where Africa is. And we want to move away from that corner as Africans into the top right corner. And unfortunately, it places an onerous assignment on our shoulders. I'm putting this up front because if we have a qualifications framework which doesn't help us to move forward, to move the citizenry forward, we still would sit with the same challenges, although we might have tools to help us in this regard. Next slide, please. This gentleman from the World Bank, we can proceed, said a competitive society is one which achieves an equilibrium between the wealth creation and social cohesion. Now, these are parts of the principles of our qualifications framework. I'm building the case. Next slide, please. Now, the world is changing as much as we want to change. We want to have a qualifications framework, not because all other continents and countries have got continental regional qualifications frameworks. No, it's not the point. I'm fortunate that I'm the chairperson of the transnational qualifications framework of the Commonwealth of Nations. We have learned a great deal, and we all set out to achieve something better It's through portability of qualifications, remittances that return to your country, people moving from country to country in order to be able to study or even to go and work. That's to do with economics. Now, within all these, we also find changes taking place, changes that affect education and training, changes that affect qualifications. The first change is technological in nature. We all talk about the disruption by the fourth industrial revolution and how it has changed the way we do things. Technology has changed. What was impossible, what was deemed impossible in the past has changed. The politics is changing, colleagues. The way we look at Africa, the market and labor mobility, all these are affected by political change. And in Africa, there is no exception. We are changing. Also, the generation change which is taking place. The youth of today questions everything. They don't conform with what the teacher, the lecturer, the professor is saying. Why? Because they've got the library in their hands. The businesses are changing, and I'm talking not only of businesses in the industries. Education and training has become a business, and they are changing. They are like tents. They come, and if there's no money, they pack up, they go. They are not like pyramids. Life expectancy has changed, and it continues to change. At least there is a higher life expectancy within most of the countries across the African continent. And so we experience changes that take place, and changes affect education and training, particularly higher education. Next slide. In higher education, there are debates, the purpose debate. And I'm raising the purpose debate because many an institution would stand up and say, this issue of qualifications frameworks adds additional work to what we are doing. Simply because external, no, please go back. Simply because they prefer the status quo, or nobody wants to be subjected to external quality assurance. The funding has changed. My colleague from Seychelles has just indicated, for us to establish qualifications authorities responsible for frameworks, they need to be funded. The funding models for higher education or school education for us responsible for across the board, these are changing. The autonomy of institutions is changing. The control is changing. These are trends, not across only in Africa, but globally. People are now looking at learning outcomes. And learning outcomes are the fundamental building blocks of a qualifications framework. The economy dictates what we should do in our classes. Unfortunately, we need to strike a balance. The whole issue of employability post-attainment of qualifications remains a challenge, because we sit with unemployed graduates, many people with degrees ending up driving taxis or working in restaurants. Not that I'm thinking driving a taxi is not an honorable thing, but that's not what the person has set out to achieve when enrolling for studies. And so we can go on. The demand and supply equation remains a challenge, colleagues. Next slide. And look at this baby. The baby is campaigning for higher education for all. But with globalization, people have started moving, services have started moving, products have started moving. So borders have become flexible, more flexible, and so frameworks should allow, whether it's at national or continental level or regional level, for qualifications to be portable, to move across borders. The whole offering of education and training has changed. There are more private institutions nowadays than public institutions. If consumerism means if you have students who don't make it, that the bottom line, the profit margins are not good enough, you close the institution. Internationalization, many institutions work through joint ventures, they operate through cooperation, joint awards, etc. And so it goes on. Quality assurance has become the language in higher education in the last 2 decades. Qualifications frameworks, a decade ago, there were about 20 at most. Now we find about, at all levels, 170 qualifications frameworks. So there are changes taking place, and Africa cannot sit back and wait and see what the world is doing. No, we must somehow also become players of the game. And that is the basis I'm building on why we have in Namibia established a qualifications framework, and why we are keen to be associated with regions. Right, now I have made my case. We can go on and talk about the framework itself. Next slide, please. Yeah, there is a, go on, next slide. There is a gap between what the market demands and what the supply is, and we need to be mindful of that gap. And that's what qualifications try to achieve. Next slide. Higher education offerings, basic education offerings, further education offerings are packed on levels per field, the content, there are standards. That's the supply end of the equation. Now, do we supply them labor market with what they require to their specifications and standards? Huge debate around it. Next slide. The purpose of our national qualifications framework and frameworks generally is to reform education systems. It communicates about the substance of education systems. It talks to articulation, referencing, and above all for me, about quality assurance. Next slide, please. Okay, how does the qualifications framework look like? Yeah, thank you so much. Globally, qualifications frameworks have got architecture which includes levels. The one on your right-hand side is our national qualifications framework in picture. We have got 10 levels in Namibia. Level 1, the lowest competences required, with level 10 where knowledge is created. So each level grows with quantum of learning, with complexity of learning. And each level has got a level descriptor, which enables us to understand what a person with a qualification at level 1 can do, how level 1 differs from level 2, etc. And then each qualifications framework talks about assessment methods. It is based on credit systems. In our case, we talk about one learning national, one credit is 10 national hours of learning. And that is what Southern Africa does. And that is, except for Europe, where it, my apologies, where it's slightly different. And then we've got quality assurance systems, which I will talk about. Clearly, you can see from here, level 7, bachelor's degree. Level 8, bachelor honors or professional degrees. And I will explain now how the credits are calculated for a master's, doctoral degree, etc. Next slide, please, Eduardo. Now, if we develop qualifications frameworks, we should agree on principles. I've spoken about competence. Qualifications nowadays are linked to competence. If you have a degree or a diploma means you are able and understood something at a particular level. But our qualifications should be credible. It doesn't help we join the AU or the Africa Continental Qualifications family, but our qualifications in our nation are suspect. And if I use alternative means to become a member and have our qualifications referenced through the framework at the continental level, we bring the continental qualifications framework in disrepute as well. Qualifications should lead to flexibility. It is of such in this world that when you move from a certain part of the world, your qualifications are deemed maybe inferior, maybe not based on standards that people set out to be of. So we must clarify the flexibility of qualifications. Access should be known, how qualifications articulate, etc. And so I can go on with the list. Importantly, qualifications should be based on standards in our nation. That's our principles for our qualifications framework is, if there are no standards developed, you cannot register the qualification on the framework. And these standards are publicized. Dear colleagues, those who are setting up new frameworks, the 3 or 5 who already have established frameworks, if we talk of regional or continental qualifications framework, we talk about trust. We talk about communication between nations or members of a framework. If we don't have legitimate qualifications, if they are not standard-based, there won't be trust. And if there's no trust, we can have the most beautifully decorated framework, but nothing will happen. Our framework talks about progression, as was indicated. We also facilitate recognition of prior learning as well as lifelong learning. These are the principles that govern, amongst others, our national qualifications framework since its establishment in 1996, which I'll talk about now. Next slide. This is just how our framework looks like. Now you'd see on your extreme right, we also have unit standards. Our framework, as I've said, is flexible. That's a principle of the framework. If it is not flexible, if it doesn't make for lifelong learning, then qualifications cannot be registered. Then we have failed in attaining or achieving our mission. Unit standards, some qualifications are based on unit standards. Others make provision for micro awards. So our framework is very flexible. As long as there are standards, you can recognize, you can register any type of qualification, whether it's micro credentialing or full qualifications, as long as it is meeting the prescribed criteria and standards for the qualifications framework. This is the framework of the Namibia Qualifications Authority. Next slide, please. Yes, as I've said, our framework has 10 levels. It's a unifying mechanism. It expresses value of different qualifications on the same framework. It's a unified framework. We don't have a framework for schools, for vocational training or further training. We have one framework. The framework enhances acceptance and recognition of qualifications, both nationally and externally. The framework defines specific characteristics of qualification types and makes provision for articulation. It indicates the fields of study, creates a common currency which is understood by all institutions, all employers, all professional bodies, etc. And it facilitates determination of equivalences. If somebody comes with a qualification from Kenya, from South Africa, from Senegal, we should be able to translate that qualification on the framework. May I proceed?
Yes.
Next slide. Yeah, now what we do is, I've said we are using certificates, diplomas, those are the main type of qualifications. But each certificate to be packed on a level of the framework, for example, certificates must have 400 learning hours, which is 40 credits. Remember I said 1 credit, 10 notional learning hours. So 40 credits must be achieved at or above the level of certification. So if the certificate is at level 2, it must be above, with 40 credits above level 1. And that's how we go on determining that. I assume people are already aware of this. With diplomas, you'd see diplomas are between levels 5 and is it 7 on our framework. Same principle applies. How we determine how many credits a certificate or a diploma at a particular level must have. For example, 1,200 hours of learning, that's 120 credits. Roughly speaking, that's about a year of learning. For a qualification to be registered at level 5, it must have 172 credits at the level above or below NQF level 5. Always one level lower, but the credits are gazetted and it's publicized. Everyone knows when they develop qualifications. Next, please. And so we can go on with degrees, honors and bachelor's degrees. A master's degree at a level 9 requiring a research article, and also a doctoral degree is above a master's degree. It's actually the normal nomenclature which was translated or transposed in part to the NQF. Next slide. Now, this is what we do as the NQA in developing and maintaining the NQF. We set standards for all occupations, and that's as per the Act. The NQA and the NQF are established by an act of law. It's not a group of friends who came together and said, let's start this. It's governed by an act of law, and there is a body which I'll explain now. I at first started with the premise for the NQF, what we do for the NQF, before I come to the structure. We set standards for any profession, any occupation. Not the NQA, we work with all the experts in the field. Now, if we say for one person to be a specialist, medical specialist in a particular field, those competencies required for that profession are set in a standard format. And these standards are used to develop a qualification. I'm using a wrong example because specialists are higher up. Let's use a teacher. For you to be a qualified teacher, you need to have a number of skills, competences, attitude, etc., attributes. Now, these are written down in such format that they are used to develop the curriculum or the qualification per se. So we first set standards. The standards are used for developing the qualifications. Once the qualifications are developed and are registrable on the qualifications framework, then the institution that wants to offer the qualification should apply for accreditation to prove that they have the capacity to offer the qualification. And those are the first three things we do. The other things we do is the evaluation of qualifications. We don't do education and training. Evaluation and validation is when people are done, we get the data and then we maintain the database, both of local qualifications registered on the framework, qualifications that have been attained by Namibians, so that we know how many Namibians have studied where, in what field for national planning. But also, if somebody from Egypt wants to know, there is a person wanting to go and study at the University of Cairo, for example, or Egypt, they ask the NQA, do you know this person? Do you have this qualification? And we can verify that, either ourselves from our database, or we can talk to the institution. And that's what we do, amongst others. Next slide. Now, quality. That's the very main reason for qualifications frameworks nowadays. But quality has got many sides, many dimensions. It's customer driven. So the university or college or whatever institution cannot just stand up and say, I want to offer ABC in Namibia. You must determine, you must do a feasibility study as an institution to determine whether there is a need for such a qualification. We of late have experienced an oversupply of lawyers, oversupply of even school teachers at particular levels and fields. So because government funds these students, there must be a minimum level of mismatch between demand and supply. Quality also talks to relevance, and quality is time-bound. Quality changes continually. Quality is about cost, and so we can go on. Yeah, this is just an introduction to quality. Next slide. Yeah, and so this one just explains the different approaches to quality as was done by a professor in the stage. There is the transcendent approach that talks about education should transcend life. Education is not only about getting a qualification. Education is not just compartments. It must form languages. The manufacturing-based approach for education and training is the design, development of the assessment tools, design of the curriculum, design. It's got to do with the design. And it's normally learner-centered, it's nation-focused, it's driven to the agenda of the nation, not obviously casting out all others that are not contributing to the national development agenda. And it's value-based, and so we can go on. Next slide, please. When we do accreditation, this is the process we follow. The first thing is we receive the application, but when you receive the applications, there are gazetted rules. Gazette means it is legal. It's not only belonging to the NQA, it's gazetted by a minister, by the government. And then when the regulations are used, and we advise the institutions on what are the principles, what are the processes, what are the documents to be submitted, and then we look at the documents. Thereafter, these are placed on our database. An officer is assigned who looks at the completeness of the application, and the officer then does a desk evaluation. After the desk evaluation, which looks at the degree of compliance and any outstanding matters, after that, we get together a team of experts from other universities. They go on a site visit together with my team at the NQA. They look at whether the institution meets all the criteria in terms of laboratories, technology, how they maintain student records, counseling, the infrastructure, all these things are looked at. It's about fitness of purpose of what is available for what is going to be offered. And then a report is produced. Such a report is given to the applicant for accreditation. They agree, disagree, and then after which discussions take place. We are not policemen. We are not controlling quality. We assure quality. And then we take it to our council, which makes the decision whether or not to grant accreditation. And accreditation is sought after in Namibia. No qualification awarded by an institution that is not accredited is recognized for any purpose in Namibia. Only accredited institutions get their qualifications on the framework, and then they get recognition for employment, for further studies, for recognition globally, depending on the protocols with which the NQA has got agreements. Next slide. Now, strange enough, education in our country is governed by numerous acts. I was glad when my colleague from Seychelles said they have done away with one body. Many a country make the mistake of creating so many bodies that there is later tension between these quality assurance bodies. We in Namibia have got the Vocational Training Authority, or the, yes, Training Authority. We've got the Council for Higher Education. We've got various bodies established by acts of law, and at times it causes confusion and frustration in the system. But we have also got a lot, and it's a weakness in our system. Next slide. The NQA is established by an act. Already in 1996, the NQA was established. That's quite a long time ago. It's a statutory body governed by a council of 8 members. These members must apply to be appointed to the council, and they are appointed by the minister responsible for education and training, and they are assisted by a secretariat. The secretariat, the CEO is the head of secretariat, and then we've got various departments, one for NQF administration, the next for accreditation, and then corporate affairs or administration. Next slide. The mandate of the NQF is as per the act. This is, yeah, the A is to establish a previous slide, please. The first objective of the NQA Act is for us to set up and administer a national qualifications framework. That's why we have a national qualifications framework. That's why it is funded. That's why it's legal. And then we are expected to set standards, whether it's for curriculum, occupational, and so next slide, we do accreditation. Any person or whichever, we also evaluate and recognize competences learned outside of formal education. Now, people think the qualifications framework is an instrument, a construct to recognize formal education only. Now, we do RPL, we do short courses, credentials, units, modules. As long as they are registrable on the framework, they can be recognized. So we also evaluate and recognize competences learned outside of formal education. And then we also look into whether qualifications meet national standards. If a qualification comes from any other country, we must compare it to our system and say, okay, it meets for an engineer. Before you can go to talk to the engineering council, your qualifications must at first be vetted by the NQA. And that is how the system is developed. Next slide. I'm almost done, colleagues. We have got committees on the council, the executive committee, qualifications committee, another one responsible for accreditation, assessment, and audit. So, and these committees work together. It's not a decision made by the staff members. Decisions are made by these committees of council, of the board, if you wish. And the others are established human resources, finance, and risk audit, because we, as a statutory organization, must also comply with governance mechanisms. Our finances must be recorded in any way as you record. Our organization is run as a company. So we must comply with all those requirements, whether it's through risk management, planning, strategic planning, human resources management, performance management, all those type of things. But that is what we do. We not only do qualifications framework. That's why if you look at next slide, our strategic plan. Okay, that is what I've already explained. That's how the structure of the organization looks like. Next slide. Yes, our vision is to be global, not just national, global. And that's why we want to be part of the African dynamics and of the African Ubuntu spirit. We want to be a global player, empowering our people. And that is about prosperity, making people's lives better through their qualifications. Vision, mission, you can slap. Each and every organization would have its vision and mission. So that you can look at, that is ours. Next one. Yes, I have said, that is why we've got 4 pillars of development. The first pillar in our strategic plan, and this is the values, the scorecard, the annual business plan, the finances, budgeting, everything comes from this one. The NQA growth and development, that is growing the organization. To find resources, the right resources, employ the right people, have the right image and brand and all those type of things. Second pillar is quality assurance systems. That is mainly to do with policy development. It has got to do with accreditation. And the next one with NQF development, which includes standard setting, registration of qualifications, validation of credentials or learning outcomes. And another one, quite interesting, is relationship management, because the NQA is an organization which works with external partners, with providers, with professional bodies, with learners, with funders, with government leaders. We must maintain relationships. We must understand what the needs are of the people so that we become the conduit between the training providers and what the nation needs. Next slide. That's what we do, basically. We've got a single integrated framework for all learning from cradle to grave. I have not spoken about Corona and COVID, because that's another debate. It is about how we offer qualifications. Yeah, okay. Then about access, mobility, and progression, quality assurance, communication and redress, and then personal development of the learner. That's what we focus upon. We provide advice under the last one, personal socio-economic development. Before a student wants to embark on or register with a particular institution, they may approach the NQA to inquire whether we would recognize the qualifications from the University Eduardo. We will do our research, we will talk to our counterparts in whichever countries and then advise the learners so that they are not exploited or don't waste their limited resources. Next slide. I want to leave you with this one. A qualifications framework doesn't have plans designed by architects. Mm-hmm. You grow as you work daily. Mm-hmm. There is no clear-cut recipe for new institutions. Even for the Africa Continental Qualifications Framework, we will have to chaff, we will have to grind, we'll have to work on it to make it a success. But we are the ones who can make it a success. I leave you on that note. Thank you.